For basically all of human history, people have reported these incredibly powerful, life-changing moments that they describe as, well, an encounter with God. But are they? Are they getting a genuine message from some higher power, or is it all just a trick of our own minds? That's the huge puzzle we're going to try and unpack.
And it all starts with stories just like this one. You have Saul, a guy whose entire mission was to hunt down and persecute Christians. Then, on the road to Damascus, bam! He has this earth-shattering experience that completely rewrites who he is, turning him into the Apostle Paul. We're not talking about a weird dream here. This was a fundamental reset of his entire life.
And a story like Paul's really forces us to ask the big question, right? What actually happened on that road? Was this a genuine, history-altering encounter with the divine? Or was it a really complex neurological event, something we might be able to explain with modern science? That is the tension at the absolute heart of this whole debate.
So, first things first. When people say they've had one of these experiences, what are they actually talking about? We need to define our terms. What exactly is a mystical experience?
A great place to start is with the philosopher and psychologist William James. He was fascinated by this stuff. He dug into accounts from all these different cultures and religions and started to notice a pattern. He argued that no matter where they came from, these true mystical experiences all seem to share 4 key characteristics.
So, what are these 4 traits? First, James said they're ineffable. That's just a fancy way of saying you can't really put it into words. It defies language. Second, it's noetic, which means you come away with some kind of profound new knowledge or insight. Third, it's transient. The moment itself is pretty brief, even if it changes you for the rest of your life. And finally, it's passive. This isn't something you do, it feels like something that is happening to you. You're not in the driver's seat.
And James had this brilliant way of defending the reality of these experiences. He said that a skeptic dismissing them is like a person who was born deaf trying to judge a piece of music. They just don't have the tools to understand it. For the people who've had these experiences, the experience itself is all the proof they'll ever need.
Okay, so let's say we accept that these experiences feel completely real to the person having them. Does that mean we should take them as actual evidence for God? Let's dig into the philosophical case for why you might.
For this, we can turn to philosopher Richard Swinburne. He came up with a really common-sense approach. He basically says, hey, we should treat claims about religious experiences the same way we treat any other kind of claim, using 2 simple, everyday principles.
So his first one is the principle of credularity. Basically, trust your own senses. If it looks like there's a book on your desk, you should probably believe there's a book on your desk, unless you have a good reason not to, like you're dreaming. The second is the principle of testimony. In other words, trust other people. If your friend tells you they saw a book, you should believe them, unless you know they're a prankster or something. For Swinburne, the whole point is that our default setting should be to believe.
But, and this is a huge but, this raises a massive problem almost immediately. Does this believe people by default rule apply to everything? What about claims that are, let's say, a little more out there than seeing a book on a desk?
Right. Philosopher Peter Vardy points this out perfectly. He says, look, tons of people all over the world sincerely claim they've seen UFOs. They pass the principle of testimony. So should we just believe them? Vardy argues that when a claim is this extraordinary, being a little cautious isn't being a skeptic, it's just using your common sense.
Okay, let's switch gears. We're going to move away from pure philosophy now and look at the scientific challenges. What happens when we look at the physical brain itself?
And first up, of course, is Sigmund Freud. He had let's call it a blunt take on this whole thing. For Freud, a religious experience isn't some encounter with a divine being. No, it's a wish-fulfilling neurosis. He saw it as a giant coping mechanism, born from our deep-seated fear of death and our childhood desire for a powerful father figure to protect us.
The analogy Freud used was powerful. He said, imagine a person lost and dying of thirst in the desert. Their desire for water is so overwhelmingly intense that their brain just creates one. They hallucinate an oasis. Freud argued that humanity, lost in the desert of a meaningless universe and terrified of death, does the exact same thing. We collectively hallucinate God.
But what if you could actually create these feelings in a lab? Well, neuroscientist Michael Persner tried to do just that with something that got nicknamed the God helmet. It's a device that uses magnetic fields to gently stimulate the temporal lobes of the brain. And the results? A lot of his subjects reported feeling an unseen presence there in the room with them. The implication is just staggering. If a machine can make you feel something spiritual, then maybe the source isn't out there in the heavens, but right inside your own skull.
So, we've looked at the individual mind and the individual brain, but what about the power of the group? That brings us to the sociological challenge.
The sociologist Emil Durkheim had this truly radical idea. He argued that when people get together and worship God, what they're really worshiping is a symbol of their own society. You know that powerful feeling of being part of something bigger than yourself? Durkheim said that feeling isn't God, it's the invisible but very real force of the community itself.
Durkheim even had a name for it: collective effervescence. Think about that electric buzz in the air at a massive concert or a huge sports match. It's that feeling of being swept up by the crowd. A religious believer might feel the Holy Spirit during a moment of intense group worship. Durkheim would just say, nope, that's a powerful, contagious group emotion that you're simply misinterpreting as something divine. Now we have to turn to what might be the biggest logical problem of all for these experiences: the problem of conflicting claims.
And here's the issue in a nutshell. A devout Catholic might have a vision of the Virgin Mary. A Hindu might experience a mystical union with Vishnu. A Muslim might feel the undeniable presence of Allah. The problem is, these experiences are being used as proof for religions with completely incompatible beliefs. They can't all be literally correct, so how can any one of them be solid proof for any one religion?
So you might be wondering, how do people who believe in these experiences get around that pretty major problem? Well, one of the most popular responses comes from an idea called religious pluralism, and it's best explained with a really old, really famous analogy.
The philosopher John Hick famously used the story of the blind men and the elephant. You've probably heard it. One man touches the elephant's leg and says, "It's a tree." Another touches the trunk and says, "It's a snake." They're both wrong, of course, but they are both touching the same animal. Hick argued that all the world's religions are like those blind men. They're each experiencing a small part of the same ultimate divine reality, but they're interpreting it through their own limited cultural framework.
So after all that, after looking at the arguments from believers, from philosophers, from psychologists, from sociologists, where does that actually leave us?
Well, we're left right back where we started, with this fundamental question. Are these profound, life-altering experiences a true window letting us peek at the divine, or are they just a mirror, reflecting our own hopes, our own brain chemistry, and our own societies right back at us? It seems, for now at least, the puzzle remains unsolved.